The early morning sun struggled to pierce through a dense blanket of fog that clung to the quiet suburban streets. Cars lined the driveways of pristine homes, their glassy windows reflecting the faint golden hues of dawn. On the edge of the neighborhood, where the manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and overgrown weeds, a boy sat on the curb, shivering against the cold. Michael, no older than 14, clutched a battered backpack to his chest. His clothes were grimy, a patchwork of faded fabric that spoke of too many nights spent under open skies. His deep brown eyes darted nervously, as if he were looking for something, or someone. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this neighborhood, where people would surely notice a boy like him. Across the street, a sleek black luxury car gleamed in the driveway of a sprawling estate. Its chrome accents caught the light like a beacon. The house behind it stood like a fortress, towering and imposing, its modern glass facade betraying no emotion, no warmth. From an upstairs window, the shadow of a man moved. William Grayson, the owner of the house, and one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. William was known for his meticulous nature. Everything in his life was a calculated move, from the stocks he invested in to the color of his tie. He had built an empire from scratch, earning the admiration of the public and the envy of his peers. But not everything in his world was perfect. Inside the house, the sound of a wine glass shattering broke the stillness. "Are you even listening to me, William?" A woman's voice, sharp and brittle, echoed down the grand staircase. Claire, his wife, stood in the kitchen, her manicured nails gripping the edge of the marble countertop. Her expression was as frosty as her tone. She was dressed impeccably as always, but her eyes betrayed a storm of frustration. "I have a meeting," William replied flatly, adjusting his tie in the reflection of a nearby mirror. He didn't even glance in her direction. "You always have a meeting," she snapped. "But one day, William, you're going to regret—" "Enough, Claire." His voice was low but carried a weight that silenced her. He grabbed his briefcase and keys, brushing past her without another word. Outside, Michael watched as William emerged from the house, his polished shoes clicking against the driveway. The boy's heart raced as he saw the man approach the car. He had to do something, but his legs felt frozen. Suddenly, Michael's gaze shifted to the woman at the window. Claire was standing there, her face pale and unreadable. She clutched the curtains tightly as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. And then, as William reached the driver's door, Michael saw something strange. The woman's lips moved, forming silent words. "Don't drive." Michael blinked, unsure if he had imagined it, but before he could process, his eyes caught something else. A faint, unnatural glint beneath the car. Something metallic. His chest tightened. The boy scrambled to his feet, dropping his backpack. "Wait! Stop!" he yelled, his voice cracking. William froze, turning his head sharply toward the source of the commotion. His brows furrowed as he saw the ragged figure running toward him. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" William demanded, his tone more annoyed than alarmed. Michael skidded to a halt, panting. You can't drive that car, sir." "The brakes. Someone cut them." For a moment, silence hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. William's eyes narrowed, scanning the boy with suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "I saw it," Michael stammered. "Underneath the car, I think someone tampered with it." Claire appeared at the door, her expression a mix of shock and something else. Fear? She didn't move, just stood there watching the scene unfold. William turned back to his car, his skepticism evident. "You expect me to believe this nonsense? A random kid showing up out of nowhere, accusing someone of sabotaging my car?" Michael stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "Please, you have to believe me. I wouldn't make this up. Just check under the car. Get off my property." William snapped, his patience wearing thin. But then Claire spoke, her voice unsteady. "William, maybe you should listen to him." William hesitated, glancing between his wife and the boy. The tension was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. Michael took another step closer, his voice trembling but firm. "If you don't believe me, then fine. But if you drive that car, you might not come back." And with that, the question loomed over them, unspoken but undeniable. Who could want William dead, and why? William's sharp eyes scrutinized Michael, his mind racing. A homeless boy showing up on his pristine driveway with a wild claim was not how he expected to start his morning. Yet something about the boy's desperation made him pause. Fine, William muttered, kneeling beside the car. His hand slid beneath the chassis, feeling for anything unusual. It didn't take long. His fingers grazed something foreign, a thin, sharp wire, cleanly severed and dangling from the brake mechanism. His heart skipped. What the? He yanked the wire free, holding it up to the light. It wasn't a random defect. It was deliberate. Claire's face turned ashen from the doorway. She stepped back, her hand clutching her chest. William, what is that? It's what the kid said it was, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. His eyes locked onto Michael. How did you know about this? Michael swallowed hard. I didn't cut it, if that's what you're thinking. I saw a man late last night. He was messing with the car. I didn't get a good look, but his voice faltered as he searched for the right words. But what? William snapped. Michael glanced nervously toward Claire. I think he came from inside your house. William's jaw tightened. Claire gasped, her hand falling to her side. What are you saying? That someone we know would try to… I don't know, Michael interrupted, his voice rising. But whoever it was, they wanted you dead. A tense silence fell over the driveway, broken only by the distant hum of morning traffic. We're calling the police, William said, pulling his phone from his pocket. No. Claire's voice cut through the air like a whip. Both men turned to her, startled. Why not? William demanded. Claire's eyes darted between them, her lips trembling. If someone in this house did it, calling the police could make things worse. We need to figure out who's behind this. Quietly. Quietly, William repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. Someone just tried to kill me, Claire. This isn't the time for discretion. But Michael, sensing the growing tension, spoke up. She's right. If the person who did this knows you're onto them, they'll cover their tracks. Or worse, try again. William glared at both of them, his mind racing. Finally, he shoved the phone back into his pocket. Fine, but this stays between us. Later that day, the house was abuzz with its usual activity. The cleaning staff moved silently through the halls, their heads down as they polished and swept. William retreated to his office, the evidence of sabotage, the severed wire sitting ominously on his desk. Meanwhile, Michael sat in the kitchen, devouring a sandwich like he hadn't eaten in days. Claire hovered nearby, her demeanor unusually soft. You're brave, you know, she said, her voice low. Coming forward like that. Michael glanced up, his cheeks stuffed with bread. I couldn't just let him drive. He'd die. Do you live nearby? She asked, her tone casual but probing. Michael hesitated. Not really, I just move around. Claire frowned, but before she could press further, the door to the kitchen swung open. A man in his mid-40s strode in, his expression cold and calculating. His name was Victor, William's business partner. Claire? Victor said smoothly, his gaze lingering on her for a beat too long. I didn't expect to see you here. William said you'd be out. Claire stiffened. Change of plans. Victor's eyes flicked to Michael, narrowing slightly. And who's this? A friend, Claire said quickly. He's just leaving. Michael stood abruptly, sensing the unspoken tension. He mumbled a quick thanks and slipped out of the kitchen. Victor leaned against the counter, his smile thin. You're awfully protective of strays, Claire. Is there something you need, Victor? She asked, her voice frosty. Victor's smile widened. Just checking in. William's been preoccupied lately. Makes me wonder what's got him so distracted. Claire's hand gripped the edge of the counter. If you're so curious, why don't you ask him yourself? Victor chuckled, the sound low and menacing. Oh, I will. That night, Michael decided to stay close to the house. He didn't trust the people inside, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He found a sheltered spot near the garage and settled in, clutching his backpack tightly. Around midnight, he heard voices, quiet, hurried whispers coming from the side of the house. Crawling closer, he peeked around the corner and saw two figures, Victor and a woman he didn't recognize. This has to be done soon, Victor was saying. He's getting too close to the truth. The woman nodded. But what about Claire? She's not going to just stand by. Victor's expression darkened. She's a liability. If she doesn't fall in line, she'll go down with him. Michael's blood ran cold. They were talking about William and Claire. Suddenly, Victor's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the darkness. Michael ducked behind the wall, his heart pounding. Did you hear that? The woman asked nervously. Probably just an animal, Victor muttered. Let's get out of here. Michael waited until their footsteps faded before creeping back to his spot. He had to warn William, but how? That night, Michael decided to stay close to the house. He didn't trust the people inside, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He found a sheltered spot near the garage and settled in, clutching his backpack tightly. Around midnight, he heard voices, quiet, hurried whispers coming from the side of the house. Crawling closer, he peeked around the corner and saw two figures, Victor and a woman he didn't recognize. "This has to be done soon," Victor was saying. "He's getting too close to the truth." The woman nodded. "But what about Claire? She's not going to just stand by." Victor's expression darkened. "She's a liability. If she doesn't fall in line, she'll go down with him." Michael's blood ran cold. They were talking about William and Claire. Suddenly, Victor's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the darkness. Michael ducked behind the wall, his heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" the woman asked nervously. "Probably just an animal," Victor muttered. "Let's get out of here." Michael waited until their footsteps faded before creeping back to his spot. He had to warn William, but how? The next morning, Michael found William pacing in his office. He knocked hesitantly on the doorframe. "What is it?" William asked, his tone sharper than intended. Michael stepped inside, lowering his voice. "I heard Victor last night. He's planning something, and it's not just about the car. He thinks you're onto him." William's eyes narrowed. "What did he say exactly?" Michael repeated the conversation as best he could. William's face grew darker with every word. "This doesn't make sense," William muttered. "Victor's been my partner for years. He wouldn't—" But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. "What if it's about the company?" Michael suggested. "Maybe he wants to take over." William didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. That evening, William set a trap. He left the car in the driveway, its hood slightly ajar, as if it were being repaired. Then he and Michael hid in the shadows, waiting. Hours passed, the tension thick. Then, just after midnight, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Victor. He crept toward the car, a tool in his hand, his movements deliberate. "Gotcha," William whispered, stepping out of the shadows. Victor froze, his face a mask of shock. But the shock quickly gave way to fury. "You don't understand," Victor spat. "I had no choice." "No choice?" William roared. "You tried to kill me." Victor's eyes darted around, desperate for an escape. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, but you were going to ruin everything." "Everything?" William demanded. "What are you talking about?" Victor hesitated, his jaw clenched. Then finally, he admitted. "The company, the deal with the investors, it's a scam. If you found out, you'd blow it all up. I couldn't let that happen." William stared at him, stunned. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. But before he could respond, Claire appeared, a phone in her hand. "The police are on their way, Victor. It's over." Victor's face twisted in rage, but he didn't resist as William stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You betrayed me," William said, his voice heavy with pain. Victor didn't reply. The sound of sirens in the distance marked the end of his schemes. As the police arrived, Michael stood quietly to the side, watching as the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. But one question lingered in his mind. Was Victor really working alone? The sound of police sirens faded into the distance as Victor was escorted off the property in handcuffs. For a moment, the world outside William's estate seemed calm, yet inside, the tension crackled like a live wire. Michael stood in the foyer, his heart still racing. Despite Victor's arrest, something felt off. The look in Victor's eyes before he was taken away, it wasn't fear or regret. It was a quiet confidence, as though he knew something no one else did. William paced the length of the grand living room, his fists clenched. "A scam," he muttered under his breath. He said the deal was a scam. Claire watched him from the corner, her expression unreadable. "William, you need to let this go for tonight." "The police—" "I trusted him, Claire," William exploded, his voice reverberating off the walls. "Victor was my partner for over a decade. If he was willing to sabotage me, who else might be involved?" Claire flinched at his outburst but quickly recovered. "You've done everything you can. The police will handle the rest." Michael cleared his throat. What if he wasn't working alone? Both adults turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" William asked, his tone sharp. Michael hesitated but pressed on. Victor didn't seem scared. It's like he still thought he could win. "What if there's someone else pulling the strings?" William scoffed. "Who else would it be? Victor was the one sneaking around. He's the one who would benefit most from your downfall." Michael interrupted, his voice growing steadier. The question hung in the air. heavy and damning. Claire's face paled. You don't think... Michael looked at her directly. Do you know something, Mrs. Grayson? Her eyes darted to William, then back to Michael. Of course not. How could you even suggest that? But Michael noticed something strange. She wouldn't meet William's gaze. Later that night, William sat in his study staring at the severed brake wire on his desk. The room was dimly lit, the shadows deepening his brooding expression. Michael sat across from him, the boy's presence now a strange comfort in the chaos. I don't get it, William said finally. Victor's smart, but he's not reckless. If he knew the police would trace everything back to him, why go through with it? Michael thought for a moment. What if he didn't plan on getting caught? What if someone set him up? William's brow furrowed. Who? Before Michael could answer, Claire appeared in the doorway, her face drawn and tired. William, you need to stop this. It's late. Come to bed. I'm not done, William replied curtly. She hesitated before stepping inside. I know you're angry, but obsessing over this won't fix anything. William's eyes narrowed. You seem awfully eager for me to drop this. Claire froze. What's that supposed to mean? Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the rising tension. You've been acting strange ever since this started, William said, his voice cold. First, you didn't want me to call the police, then you tried to downplay Victor's betrayal. Why, Claire? Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Tell me the truth, William demanded, standing to his full height. Were you involved in this? Claire's face crumpled, and for a moment Michael thought she might break down. But then she straightened, her eyes hardening. Fine. You want the truth? Yes. I knew what Victor was planning. The words hit like a thunderclap. William staggered back, his expression a mix of shock and rage. You knew? He whispered. How could you? Why would you? Because I had no choice, Claire shouted, her voice cracking. Do you think I wanted this? Victor came to me months ago. He said the company was bleeding money and that if you found out you'd fire him and leave me with nothing. William stared at her, his jaw clenched. You were willing to let him kill me? No, Claire cried. That was never part of the plan. He told me it would just be a warning, a way to scare you into stepping down. But then things got out of hand. Out of hand. The words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. You knew someone tampered with my car, William said, his voice dangerously low. That's why you didn't want me to call the police. Claire's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Michael couldn't stay silent any longer. Mrs. Grayson, he said, his voice trembling. Why didn't you warn him? Why didn't you stop Victor? Claire turned to him, her eyes glistening with tears. Because I was scared. Victor said if I told anyone, he'd ruin me. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it would all be gone. William let out a bitter laugh. Ruin you? What about me, Claire? What about us? Claire's lips trembled. I didn't think he'd go this far. I thought I could control it. Control? William's voice rose. You thought you could control a man like Victor? You betrayed me, Claire. You betrayed us. Claire broke down, sobbing into her hands. But William's expression remained stone cold. I can't fix this, he said finally, his voice hollow. You've destroyed everything. Suddenly Michael spoke up. Wait. Both adults turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Mrs. Grayson might have made a mistake, but Victor is still the one behind all of this. He's the one who needs to pay, Michael said, his eyes blazing with determination. William looked at him, his expression softening slightly. And how do you propose we do that? Michael hesitated but then said, We find out who else he's working with. Victor isn't the kind of guy to act alone. If there's more to this, we need to expose it. As they pieced together the events of the last few weeks, a terrifying realization dawned. Victor's scam wasn't just about the company. It was part of a larger conspiracy involving high-level investors, people who stood to lose millions if William uncovered the truth. One name stood out among the documents Michael had seen earlier that day, a name that chilled him to his core. Philip Crane, William whispered, staring at the file in his hands. Michael frowned. Who's that? A rival, William said. He's been trying to buy out my company for years. If he's behind this, it means this isn't over, Michael finished. The room fell silent as they processed the gravity of the situation. Victor might be in custody, but the real mastermind was still out there, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. As the clock ticked past midnight, one thing was clear. The battle wasn't over, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the Grayson estate, but inside, the atmosphere was anything but serene. William, Michael, and Claire sat in the living room, surrounded by stacks of documents and hastily scribbled notes. The name Philip Crane loomed large in their minds, a shadow over the chaos they'd just endured. "We can't just sit here," Michael said, his voice steady despite his young age. "If Crane is the one pulling the strings, he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." William nodded grimly. "And what he wants is everything I've built." Claire, her face pale but resolute, spoke softly. "Then we have to fight back. Together." The irony of her words wasn't lost on anyone. Her betrayal had nearly cost William his life, yet here she was, offering to stand by his side. William hesitated, his gaze locked on her. "Why now, Claire? Why should I trust you after everything you've done?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I want to make it right. For you. For us." Michael broke the tension. "We don't have time for this. If we're going to stop Crane, we need evidence and a plan." Over the next few days, the unlikely trio worked tirelessly. Michael's street smarts proved invaluable as he pieced together clues from the documents William had overlooked. Claire, determined to redeem herself, used her social connections to gather intel on Crane's activities. William, meanwhile, contacted his most trusted allies in the company, those he knew wouldn't betray him. Together, they began to build a case against Crane and his network of conspirators. Michael discovered that Crane's plan hinged on a fraudulent deal that would bankrupt William's company, leaving it vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Victor had been the linchpin, but with him out of the picture, Crane was scrambling to cover his tracks. "We have to act fast," Michael said, laying out the evidence. "If this deal goes through, it's over." The showdown came in the form of a high-stakes board meeting, held in a sleek skyscraper in the heart of the city. Crane had called the meeting, confident that his scheme would go unnoticed. William entered the room with his head held high, Michael at his side. Claire stayed behind, her presence too controversial to risk. The room was filled with powerful executives, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. At the head of the table sat Philip Crane, his smile smug and predatory. "William," Crane greeted, his tone oily, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" William didn't waste time. "I'm here to expose you, Crane, and to stop this company from falling into your hands." The room erupted in murmurs, but Crane's smile didn't waver. "Bold words, but do you have proof?" Michael stepped forward, placing a thick file on the table. "We do." One by one, William laid out the evidence. Fraudulent contracts, falsified reports, and bank transfers linking Crane to Victor's sabotage. The board members leaned forward, their disbelief turning to anger as the scale of the conspiracy became clear. Crane's confidence began to crack. "This is preposterous," he sputtered. "You can't prove any of this." Michael's voice cut through the chaos. "Actually, we can." He held up a recording device. "Victor confessed everything before he was arrested, and the police have been very interested in his story." The color drained from Crane's face. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove Crane from any dealings with the company. Legal action was set in motion, and William promised to cooperate fully with the authorities to bring Crane and his associates to justice. Outside the building, William and Michael stood on the steps, the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting. "You did good, kid," William said, clapping Michael on the shoulder. Michael grinned. "So did you." For a rich guy. They shared a laugh, the tension between them finally easing. Back at the estate, Claire waited nervously in the living room. When William and Michael walked through the door, her breath caught. "What happened?" she asked. William looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's over. Crane's finished." Relief washed over her face, but it was tempered by guilt. "William, He held up a hand, stopping her. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Claire, but I can see you're trying to make things right. That's a start." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you." The next morning, William and Michael sat on the patio, the crisp morning air filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. "So," William said, "what's next for you, Michael?" The boy shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "I don't know. Maybe I'll stick around for a bit, see where life takes me." William chuckled. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you like. You've earned it." Michael's eyes lit up, but he quickly masked his excitement. "Thanks, but don't think I'm mowing your lawn or anything." They both laughed, the sound carrying on the breeze. For the first time in weeks, the world felt right again. William's company was safe. Claire was working to rebuild trust, and Michael had found a place where he belonged. As they sat together, watching the sunrise, William spoke softly. "You know, Michael, you saved my life. Not just that night, but in ways I can't even explain." Michael looked at him, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "You saved mine too." And with that, a new chapter began. A story not of betrayal and loss, but of second chances and hope. The shadows of the past still lingered, but in their place a brighter future was taking shape. Life can throw us into unexpected situations, testing our courage, trust, and resilience. But even in the darkest times, redemption and second chances can light the way. If this story moved you, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe for more powerful tales. Remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life.